This week, Sounil Yu joins us to kick things off with AI defenses for oversharing and data leaks. In the security news, the controversial pick for National Cyber Director, the not-so-controversial pick to lead the CISA, complete with funding cuts, the controversial ESP32 backdoor that's not a backdoor, but hidden features, Darkstorm takes down X, interesting use cases for LoRa, using AI to get your dream job, details on the biggest crypto heist in history, an EDR bypass and a 404 error, slipping through the cracks in CVSS, an old school vulnerability disclosure right here in 2025, Rayhunter, a pen test that should not have been, JTAG in your Flipper Zero, a Linux webcam was used for what now? And Spatial-Domain Wireless Jamming with Reconfigurable Intelligent Surfaces. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly. This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. Deploying enterprise AI, tools like Copilot from Microsoft 365 and Glean are prone to oversharing and data leakage. They lack the in-depth access controls required to ensure that query responses align with users' need to know boundaries. Without proper access controls, these tools accelerate the discovery of improperly secured sensitive files within the organization's M365 environment. Gnostic enables enterprises to safely adopt AI through setting need-to-know-based access controls. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Gnostic and see how Gnostic can help stop AI oversharing. Coming to you from Purgatory Studios in semi-high definition, compliments of Darth Vader himself, this is Paul's Security Weekly. It's episode number 865, being recorded on Wednesday, March 12th, 2025. I am Paul Asadorian, joined here in studio by Mr. Larry Pesce. Larry, welcome.
Thank you.
What's going on, man? It's good to have you here.
Same old, same old. I meant to say this before the show. I will not be here next week, but because I'm teaching for SANS, but I'm not just teaching for SANS. I'm teaching for SANS starting at 10:30 p.m. until 7 a.m. So
sounds fun.
No,
Not fun.
India Standard Time.
Well, maybe you should get adjusted to that and just start staying up all night.
Yep.
Get ready for it.
Yeah.
Mr. Jeff Mann is here with us. Jeff, welcome.
Coming to you live from an undisclosed bunker.
It looks like you're in a bunker, yes. Very much so. Mr. Josh Marpet is here with us.
Hey, I'm back, and I'm not teaching Indian time, so it's wonderful. I get to sleep tonight, Larry. Sorry, man.
Oh, I get to sleep tonight. I get to sleep tomorrow night, but I don't get to sleep to sleep Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday next week. So,
Oof.
Mr. Bill Swearingen is back from vacation. Bill, welcome.
Hey, it wasn't vacation, but I'm happy to be back. Thanks, Paul.
There you go.
Yeah.
Mr. Sam Bound is here with us. Sam, welcome.
Good evening. Glad to be here.
Let's see. A quick announcement before we dig into it. Identiverse 2025 is returning to Las Vegas June 3rd through the 6th. Hear from 250 expert speakers and connect with 3,000 plus identity professionals across 4 days of keynotes, breakout sessions, and deep dives into the latest identity security trends. Plus, you can take part in hands-on workshops and explore the brand new non-human identity pavilion. Register now and save 25% with the discount code IDV25-SecurityWeekly at securityweekly.com/IDV2025. We are very excited to have Sounil Yu. He is CTO and co-founder from Gnostic with us today to talk about AI security and AI defense. Sounil, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Here, quick question before though. Can humans walk into the non-human pavilion?
I know, right? I thought it threw me through a loop too. The non-human identity pavilion. I think it's good marketing because now we're all like, what is that? I kind of want to know more, right?
Yeah.
oh,
Robots only.
You have to do a CAPTCHA before you get in there. Check a little box.
Yeah, you have to fail a CAPTCHA.
Yeah, you have to fail
it
it
to get in.
That's
Right.
right.
Yeah.
so cyborgs, would those still be considered human because they're only partial?
Right. You get only half. You can only see half the pavilion.
Yeah.
Larry, I think Larry was my first cyborg that I ever met, I think.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Adrian's also part cyborg. So Sunil, tell us a little bit about Gnostic, and I believe we know your other co-founder pretty well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, two of us are infamous, to use the Three Amigos the word. We're infamous. Anyway, so Gnostic, we're trying to solve an interesting problem that's been around for a while, but it's particularly necessary in the age of AI. And it's around this concept of need to know. So, as we all know, need to know is a core principle when it comes to access control, but it's actually not codified anywhere. Like, it's not explicitly stated in a policy. So, what we're actually doing is systematically capturing that policy through the process of using these LLMs to uncover sensitive content that is overshared within an enterprise, and in the process, systematically capturing an organization's need to know policy. And this need to know policy is important because these large language models that we have that are running rampant in every organization, it needs proper guardrails, but those guardrails need to be defined for each role, each person, each job function within the organization. So, an example of this would be HR has a need to know for compensation information, but engineering does not. Okay, so these sort of distinct guardrails gives large language models discretion or the ability to understand how to keep a secret.
It's interesting because I think on security mature organizations, that compartmentalization of information is done really well, right? At least we try our hardest. I know that
in both of those companies, organizations.
Yeah, right. I mean, so I have worked for companies where, like, by default, it's like a default deny, right? You don't have, if you need access to something, there's a ticket that requires manager approval for that access, and depending on that access may kind of kick off more scrutiny about your access, right? Your own data security and OPSEC may come under a microscope depending on what you're requesting access to, right? Not all the time. Sometimes
Hey,
if it's
before you
general
respond to
stuff.
that, sorry, Paul, Sunil, very quickly, just to make sure I'm understanding, when you're saying it's not codified, are you saying it's not defined in any policy or any official document, or it's not spelled out?
So, what I mean by it is that even in national security contexts, we may have a security classification guide, as an example, and the guide ultimately says you should grant this type of access to those who have a need to know. Well, who are those individuals, or what are the job functions for which a need to know is prescribed? Most of it is really just in our heads. And we give individuals discretion to say, oh, you have a need to know for this, therefore I'm going to grant you access to this content. The challenge is we now have to inform large language models of that same principle and have it codified so that it's referenceable by a large language model. And today we just don't have that. It's all implied, or it's the actual manifestation of need to know today is at this very granular data level where you are granted access to this server or this folder or this file, but it doesn't really capture the principle of need to know in that access that's granted. This is also why it's really hard for us to do access reviews. We do an access review, and we're supposed to somehow extract out the business context behind why this person has access to something. So we're kind of doing it backwards. What if we actually did it on the front end and said, here is the need to know boundaries for each person, each job function. And within that boundary, we actually go even further than what Paul was suggesting. So Paul was describing what is a traditional security function, which is to operate as the Department of No, saying, sorry, I can't give you this content. But if I understand your boundary, if I understand your need to know boundary, what if I can actually become the Department of KNOW, Department of No, that lets you actually get access to things that you don't currently have access to? It's essentially the ability for us to connect the dots across all these information silos that we have today. And so it's both. It's a very powerful concept that we're trying to. The concept of need to know can be seen as a restrictive control, but what if it's also a permissive control that allows you to have access to things that you don't already know, that you don't even know it exists, but these large language models do?
So it's interesting because, I mean, need to know is an old concept that predates the internet and technology. I mean, I practiced it many years ago in the mid 1900s when I was working for the DoD. But it very much had to do with physical data, and I immediately think it had a lot to do with data classification. So my first question would be: is it possible to make the LLM sort of neutral, third party, escrow type of, however you want to characterize it, but teach the LLM to come up with data tags, meta tags, and otherwise characterize the data so that some concept of data classification could be done? Because that's essentially what you're saying.
Well,
it's not secret, confidential, top secret. It's engineering, it's payroll, it's
That's
R&D and stuff like that. But we're gonna, I joked about there's not a whole lot of companies, at least in my opinion, that do that or do it well. Everything just kind of gets branded company confidential or
That's
proprietary, and that's it. And that's, I mean, you've got enough to build a company off of that being a weak model.
Yeah, it's an insufficient model for us to be able to do proper need to know controls for our large language model, especially inside of an enterprise, because everything, or most things in an enterprise is going to be confidential or proprietary, but that doesn't necessarily provide the right guardrails for an individual who may be probing for things like, hey, do we have layoffs coming up? So this perspective of being able to put topic labels or being able to understand the underlying nature of the content and to tie that back to what is your job function and does your job function relate to this content is fundamentally the principle of need to know that we need to now systematically codify.
We have to have that now, Sounil, with LLMs being deployed in the enterprise. Right?
That's right.
I mean, it's really what we're talking about is the adoption of things like Copilot is probably the most prevalent in enterprises because most run Microsoft suite of software and Microsoft's pushing Copilot. And like, great, let's push all our data into Copilot and then we can all find everything much easier, right?
Yeah.
It's probably one of the selling points, I would imagine. Because ironically, if you're a Google shop and you have Google Drive, you can't find anything. It's literally a search company.
Actually, it's funny because so for a while, Google did not turn on Gemini for Workspace on top of Drive. Okay, they only turned it on for docs and slides and so on.
It wants to like take meeting notes in my Google Meet and
Yes.
stuff. Yeah.
And I thought initially it was because it might have been either a technical issue, but at the same time, I think it was a precaution because anybody who has Google Drive knows there's like virtually no governance on who has access to what in there. And so I asked a prospective customer just the other day, well, let's go and just ask. So it happened to be a VC, and I said, hey, go ask about cap tables, okay? And they were like, oh, yeah, here are all the cap tables. And I asked, do you think you're the only one who can see all those cap tables? What if you saw it from the perspective of somebody who doesn't have a need to know for that? Would they get the same answers? And they were like, let me go check, because that was a real concern for them. And it's the ability for these engines to find. So here's a perspective to offer. Many of us are knowledge workers. What helps knowledge workers become more productive? More knowledge, of course, right? When you roll out a large language model, like a network, your knowledge space becomes flat. Okay? A lot of knowledge is reachable, which makes it very powerful, but also extraordinarily dangerous. So, like a network, what do we want to do? We want to segment our knowledge. So the knowledge segmentation is essentially this need-to-know policy. The need-to-know policy is the segmentation policy you want to inform a large language model to say, okay, here, we need to construct it in this sort of way so that these people can get access to this type of knowledge and these other people cannot. I rarely use this word, but I think it is actually potentially the proper word here, which is it's a form of zero trust for AI. Okay. But I hate the word zero trust in this particular context because it invalidates the other perspective I was offering, which is what if you can actually give people access to things for which they do have a need to know, but they don't have access? And I think that's, again, to me, the undersharing problem is being addressed at the same time as the oversharing problem. And the undersharing problem is arguably the worst problem that holds the business back. And that's why we roll out these large language models, because we want to solve the undersharing problem. The undersharing problem is not fully fixed because we still have all these restrictive access controls for things that you should have access to. Of course, you release those, and then all of a sudden you have a massive oversharing problem too. So the only way to balance the two is to have the segmentation policy.
So when you're looking at segmentation specifically for AI, does that require multiple LLMs, right? Or can you truly have one model that is resistant to what all the attacks that we've seen on LLMs already, right? So prompt injections or whatever to bypass those, or is there a way to have one LLM?
Sure. Yeah, so that's what you're asking. What many organizations are doing is creating domain-specific LLMs to create that segmentation. But here's the problem with that is you've now partitioned your knowledge across your organization.
Right.
And
which leads to that problem that you were just discussing, right? Right?
That's right. And so as you partition the knowledge, you just lose value in this ability to connect the dots across your estate. Now, what Bill, you're also asking is, let's say I've expressed the need to know policy. How robust are the guardrails that we have in enforcing that policy? That's a slightly different question, and we know very well that the guardrails that we put into some of these LLMs, they can be busted through with the right prompt engineering and so on and so forth. I do recognize that as a problem, and it's a problem that still needs to be solved. But as a starting point is still to establish that policy itself. What is that policy? And if you find that someone has broken through one of those guardrails, you at least have a chance to now observe it after the fact and say, hey, let's go escalate that particular thing, because somehow the need to know was violated based on what the output was. Not based on the input and what you're trying to do, but rather the output clearly violates the need to know of this individual. And now you have something that you can escalate and investigate.
Sure.
And before this, you couldn't even know that it was happening. That's it was an invisible problem.
Well, you may log it, but who's going to have time and energy to go through thousands of logs and say, oh, that's the one that we need to go follow up
on? That's if you can log it. Some LLMs you just can't. Enterprise LLMs.
Yeah.
So Neil, I want to play devil's advocate for a moment. Because it sort of reminded me of DLP and why I was never a huge fan of DLP, because it tried to classify and tag data, and that there's so many problems, with that model. We could never do it, I think, accurately enough and have it evolve to reapply tags as the data changed. So how are you doing a similar kind of thing for the data that's inside an LLM without bringing along some of the baggage that we've had with DLP?
Sure. So there's one of the biggest. There are two big problems with DLP and data scanning in general. So let's talk about DLP at rest, DLP in motion. Okay. So one of the biggest problems with DLP is just false positives. We have all these false positives, and the reason why we have false positives is because it's usually based on some regex match, and we all suck at regex. Although,
if you have a problem and you're solving it with regex, then you have two problems.
Two problems. That's right. Exactly. So, anyway, the precision of the match in terms of what you see ends up with, unfortunately, just a lot of false positives. Furthermore, when we talk about DLP, we're really forced to focus on a certain class of content. And of course, that content is things that you can pattern match on. So PII, credit card numbers, so on, so on. But how do you look for unresolved legal disputes? Okay. How do you look for cap tables, as an example? These are concepts that these large language models are able to say, you know what, I know you asked for cap tables. We don't call it, the content may actually not even have the word cap table in it, but yet the LLM is able to say, okay, this is very adjacent to this notion of a cap table. Here's the content that you're looking for. Mm-hmm. So the ability to match on concepts is what the LLMs are able to do. The other consideration is that because we're able to, what we're systematically doing is asking for content that is indeed sensitive to begin with. We're not asking for just random business topics that no one really cares about prioritizing. We're asking about sensitive business content that people would say, hey, this needs to be properly segmented out. And in the process, what we're doing is we're taking sort of like a top-down approach. Think of the DLP as a bottom-up approach where you're trying to scan this entire data estate, looking for things that need to be properly controlled, versus a top-down view that says, look, these are the things that we actually want to control. Where is it in our estate? And bingo, there you go. Here it is, here it is, here it is. Will there be false positives as a part of that? Absolutely. Okay. But the number of false positives that we see in the bottom-up approach, probably, I mean, my personal experience is like 100 to 1, right? Like you have to weed through hundreds of false positives before you find that one thing. It's like, oh, here we go. Whereas we're saying a ratio of something more like maybe 2 to 1. Okay. So it's dramatically different because the LLM is actually pretty good at saying, oh, yeah, you want this sensitive content? Here you go. And it thinks some of these other things might be sensitive too. And it's not. But at the end of the day, you're like, wow, yeah, we need to fix that problem.
So wait, are you using an AI model to help sift through the data inside the AI mod, the LLM, to enforce some kind of access control?
Not to enforce it. Well, so there's multiple mechanisms here, but one is to determine what's the nature of the content. What are the topics associated with this particular content? So we have a separate AI model for that. We also have a separate AI model for, hey, what's this job function and what type of boundaries does it need to have? Okay, so there's all these different pieces of the puzzle in terms of what we're analyzing to determine the need to know boundaries and whether or not this content fits within those boundaries. What you're also asking then is what enforces those boundaries. Okay, and the enforcement is something that we've created that enforcement mechanism, a what we call a policy enforcement point. But I actually think that many organizations or many providers of these tools are going to build their own policy enforcement point, because those policy enforcement points need to be extraordinarily robust and performant. And this is one of those not built here sort of things where people are going to say, look, I can't trust a third party to build this enforcement control. It has to be something that we can control and take ownership of. So, but the question is, what's the policy that it's going to enforce? And this is where Gnostic comes in. We provide that policy, and you can use that policy to then enforce it within tools like Copilot or Glean or whatever else it might be.
I'm digging. I'm just thinking I want this for my company that I work for, right? Because I want the advantage of being able to, Google Drive as an example.
Yes.
Query that knowledge base, right? I spent a lot of time in Drive looking at, things that researchers have published even years ago as references, right?
And
but there's also a lot of sensitive
and
there's lots of sensitive information in there too. There's new stuff like vulnerabilities that we haven't disclosed or in the process of disclosure that I'm trying to protect, with my life essentially, because I don't want that stuff to get out. And we need some mechanism to control that. So
yeah. Now here's something to be aware of. Many of these tools don't have that enforcement mechanism in place today. So that's the limitation that we have today. We don't have a way to enforce because we can't insert ourselves in line with some of these tools. So Copilot being one of the biggest culprits, I can't push my policy into Copilot. Microsoft doesn't have a hook in for that. But if you can, to Josh's point earlier, if you can extract the logs out of Copilot, then we can retroactively say, oh, hey, that was a violation of need to know.
I remember, Sounil, I saw the earliest demos of the sucker, and it was pretty crude back then. It's come a long way. And I remember you're the one that taught me about the information, data, knowledge, wisdom pyramid. And it was fascinating to talk about that stuff and knowing how the illustration of at what level the Knostic system intervenes is fascinating.
So first of all, it's called Gnostic, not Knostic. If you're Israeli, you might call it Knostic, but
I hang out with Israelis all the time. Sorry,
I know. Just as a quick historical aspect of things, people are of course familiar with the word agnostic, which means unknowable. So Gnostic is the Greek word for knowable, but it's spelled with a G, and so we spell it with a K, K-N-S. Anyway, whatever.
K-N-O-S-T-I-C.
Yes. So what Josh was referring to was a mental model, which is I found to be extraordinarily helpful. I love mental models, and what the mental model that I used here is called the DIKW pyramid. So it stands for data, information, knowledge, and wisdom. So imagine a pyramid. At the bottom is data, then you have information, then you have knowledge, and then you have wisdom. And so one of the first things I observed was we've seen this progression of technologies that have moved us up to the knowledge age. Again, we're knowledge workers, and these LLMs are really helping us tap into knowledge. Okay. All right. So then the other thing I observed is, gee, I wonder what the problem space looks like for AI. Well, I know that if I know the problem space for data, then maybe I can do some wordplay and say, okay, I know the problems with data include like data security, data quality, data privacy. Well, let's take those words and apply it to information security, information privacy. So what exactly then is knowledge security, knowledge privacy, knowledge quality? Okay. Well, knowledge quality may be the problem of hallucinations.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So now we can see the future, or at least see the patterns unfold and say, yeah, it looks like we're going to deal with these kinds of problems. So, or knowledge privacy, that became pretty evident for us when with things like Cambridge Analytica. Cambridge Analytica inferred our political affiliations. There was no data you could affect. You had to. It's a knowledge level problem. Cambridge Analytica violated our knowledge privacy, not our data privacy. Okay,
that's interesting. Well, I'd argue that Facebook violated our data privacy. Cambridge Analytica was a knowledge privacy.
That's right, exactly. And then when we look at knowledge security versus data security, so data security is oftentimes this very granular, give me access to this file, folder, whatever it is. The information level would be more like the classifications that Jeff mentioned earlier. And so those are the access controls that we apply at the data and information level. So the question now is, what is the access control that we provide at the knowledge security level? And the only thing I could think of that fit was we have to control for need to know. And so that's the pattern matching I used, using a simple mental model like the DIKW to anticipate what the future looks like, and more so even how to solve some of these problems that we're seeing.
I'd actually, if my volume is okay now.
Yeah, your audio is a little low. I don't know what's going on there.
Tyler,
push the microphone towards your face.
I can do that too.
Yeah.
I've been thinking while you're talking, still thinking back about the old days and the way that we classified data. And a key element back then was compartmentalization, which is probably still done today. But if you've ever heard people complaining about data being overclassified, a lot of it had to do with if it was in a particular compartment, it was whatever it was. And the secrecy had to do not so much with the data, but with the methods and sources of how we got the data. And I'm curious as to whether that kind of concept is even appropriate to try to apply here, where anything that's coming out of the engineering department gets labeled however that happens in the LLM as engineering data, rather than trying to have to figure out, is this an engineering piece of data or is it not an engineering piece of data?
So here's the principle that I've learned that works really well for this space as well. So in networking, we know that we can apply a default allow and deny by exception policy, or the opposite, right? Default deny, allow by exception. And this basic principle seems to actually work pretty well with need to know as well. So if there's some specific content that you really need to gate and make sure that nobody has access to it except a few set of people, then that sort of default deny, allow by exception policy works actually pretty well. Let me give you an example. So we were talking to a media company, well-known media company. They have these character chatbots, and these chatbots, of course, are emulating these characters. And there's a lot of kids interacting with these chatbots. So you don't want, there's a lot of PR issues if someone tries to do something that makes these characters do something not inappropriate, right? Okay, but let me now, they try to create all these guardrails, but let me now restate the same problem, but using need to know as a basic principle here. The person interacting with this character only has a need to know for this character's universe. They do not have a need to know for anything else. And with that basic construct, it blocks out lots of stuff that you just don't have to even think about, right? Versus having to put in all these different guardrails for all these different things, you just have this default deny, allow by exception, and the exception being only that which is within the universe of this character. So now there are other ways to bypass that, sure. I mean, there's going to be other ways, creative ways people come up with. But the point is, it's a much simpler policy than what we have to deal with today.
Mm. That's awesome. Sounil, thank you so much for explaining and having the chat with us today. That was awesome.
Yeah.
Like I said, whenever we reach the point where I'm like, wait, I can use that. I want that in my day job. That's it. Yep, that's the checkbox right there that we get to check. So,
Well,
Sounil, thank you. I think you're going to stick around for the news discussion. Is that
I will
true?
try. Yes.
Okay. Awesome.
Cool.
Awesome. Sounil, thanks for appearing on Paul Security Weekly, and hopefully you can stick around for a news discussion.
Pleasure. Thanks.
Imagine a world where every threat, ransomware, supply chain attacks, zero-day exploits is stopped before it can even begin. ThreatLocker makes that world a reality with a zero-trust approach to cybersecurity. By giving you granular control on every executable that can happen in your environment, ThreatLocker protects your business around the clock. No more guessing, no more gaps. Just rock-solid protection that keeps your operations running smoothly and your data secure. Discover how ThreatLocker's least privilege approach can safeguard your organization against known and unknown threats. Take the first step towards total peace of mind. Visit securityweekly.com/ThreatLocker today. And now on to the security news. And even though I have a top story, I have another top story to top the top story because the blog post from Eclipsium hasn't come out yet. But if there is, and I know everyone saw CVE 2024 54085, which was published on March 11th, which is the description: AMI's SPX contains a vulnerability in the BMC, allowing an attacker to bypass authentication. This is a remote authentication bypass. It earned a CVSS score of 10.0. And more details will come out, but this was actually discovered by Eclipsium researcher Vlad Babkin. I've been working with him since discovery on this one, spending a lot of time on various projects with BMCs. And this one is in the web server interface for the BMC and setting a particular HTTP header to a specific value basically allows you to bypass authentication. So the vulnerability and exploit is like basically right out of the 90s. This was in AMI's code. I do want to give a huge shout out to AMI security team is amazing. I work with those folks quite a bit now, and there's an amazing team over there. They helped coordinate the disclosure. They had this fixed. They contacted, anyone who is consuming AMI's BMC code would have also supply chain, right? Consumed this vulnerability, and everyone was, I believe, hopefully notified and had ample time to push this patch into their own BMCs. So HPE, who's the other vendor? There's a couple of other vendors that we list in there, all kind of had this. And again, the blog post will come out with all the gory details, which hopefully including an exploit, because the exploit is, it's not really like exploit code. It's just basically if you send requests with this, value in the header, you can bypass authentication. So we believe about 1,000 of these exposed to the internet. So whoever's managing those 1,000 BMCs, it's a reminder you should not expose those to the internet in general, because that's really bad practice. There's likely a lot more that are not exposed to the internet. But again, this the example that I have is an attacker is able to create an account for themselves on the BMC, and with access to that, it's one of the highest level privileges on that system. Vlad has been researching BMCs for quite some time, has attack examples where he sends servers into infinite reboot loops in the BMC, and there's no way to get around that. Like you can't even recover the server, very easily anyhow, because it's before the operating system loads that it sends it into this reboot loop. So it's obviously by the CVSS score, it's pretty bad. You should definitely fix it. The fixes are available, and more details will be out when we publish our blog post.
Yeah, Paul, I just want to thank you for giving me that exploit a month in advance. I've been having a wild time
having
with
a
it.
grand old time with it, right? And knowledge is power.
Yeah, those 1,000 belong to me right
That's
now.
right.
Yeah.
Actually, Bill administers all 1,000 of those
Right,
now.
yeah. And I'm not planning on upgrading them anytime soon. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or your BMC or belong to us.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes. That's what we should have called it, Sounil.
Yeah.
We ended up calling it BMC and C Part 3 because this is like the third round of vulnerabilities that Eclipsium researchers have disclosed vulnerabilities in BMCs. So this is round 3. It's a truly fascinating area that, again, I've been spending a lot of time in. If you've never built like an open BMC instance yourself, that's kind of a fun experience too. And there's a lot of BMC firmware floating around on the internet that I've been looking at with a lot more scrutiny. So it's essentially Linux running on ARM processors, right? The processors are the A-Speed AST series. So you've got the 2500 and 2600 are the most common. In fact, I think 2500 is actually the most common deployed. 2600, I believe there's a 2700 that's even newer in that line. And they're basically ARM processors that run Linux. So nothing can go wrong there, right?
Sorry. I mean, it's
supply chain aspect, like analyzing the supply chain of these is
horrifying.
Like you would any other embedded Linux analyzing the supply chain. It depends on how it's built. When you build OpenBMC, it's built with the Octo, and it pulls in all the dependencies automatically. It's like a build framework.
Which is awesome.
Yeah, similar to when I talked about Platform IO, right? Very similar. It pulls in all the dependencies. So,
however, when you talk about round 3 of this, it sounds like it's trivia night at the local bar.
Yeah.
So it's BMC round 3. Let's go and find all the crap we can find. I mean, like
the next one should be BMCMC exploit factory.
Right. Yes. Exactly. We did toy with that.
For those of you who remember a CNC Music Factory.
I do.
Back in the day. Yep.
I do.
And I will say there are vendors that are. We talk about how this is kind of a hot mess vulnerability wise, right? But there are vendors that are doing a better job than others after some deep analysis that I won't name right now. But select vendors are doing things like backporting patches and applying patches to known out-of-date software, creating SBOMs for it. So there is a glimmer of hope that this problem is being recognized, and there are some that are doing, I think, a really good job of trying to get ahead of the problem to produce a firmware images in a platform that it has been fixed, right? So,
wait, you're saying there's problems with firmware? Oh my God, this is so new. This is my shocked face.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we'll probably have more stories about firmware. Well, actually, we do. It was the
Like
story
right
of the
now.
week. Yeah, the story of the week is kind of firmware related. I mean, ESP32s had a backdoor that's not a backdoor. They called it a backdoor, but it was really just hidden features.
The researchers that discovered it
did not call. Well, no, I heard that the researchers never called it a backdoor in their slides, but the slides have been translated from Spanish to English. So I don't believe they originally called it that. I think it was their marketing team that threw the term backdoor on, which is why at Eclipsium we work very I actually work in marketing, in the department of marketing.
It was probably an AI translator.
Could have been, but also we work very hard, at least in my day job, right, to make sure that we're not putting out FUD. That we're not overhyping a vulnerability, that we're not marketing it to be something more than it is. And this was an oops, and they corrected it. I mean, to their credit, they corrected it. And
they acknowledged
it. Zeno Kova wrote the article that was debunking it, which is absolutely fantastic, by the way. You have to read Zeno's article. His knowledge of the Bluetooth stack is absolutely amazing. He's done a lot of projects and trainings, I believe, on Bluetooth. If you've seen some of his research and presentations. So when I read his article, I was like, oh, well, Zeno's one of the experts in this space. So it carries a lot more weight for me. I don't know I had a quote from Zeno in this article that had to do with, with secure boot. So Zeno kind of touted this as if you are on the system, right? If you're executing code within the context of the microcontroller, that it allows an attacker to escalate privileges and do further things they're not supposed to do potentially. One of those he kind of touted as a secure boot bypass. And I'm going to stretch a little bit because the way secure boot works on the ESP32 is there's a ROM chip with a stage 1 bootloader that looks at a programmable eFuse, and if that fuse is set, and it's a one-time fuse, so if you say secure boot's enabled, there's a value that's written into a fuse that can't be changed. The stage 1 bootloader that's in a ROM that can't be changed checks that fuse, and then the second stage bootloader begins to implement secure boot using a certificate that is stored in another fuse. So I'm like, I'm not sure how you would change the maybe if you were to change the logic in the second stage bootloader, you might be able to do those traditional, what I call traditional secure boot attacks, right? That the founders of my day job company kind of triumphed with Windows Vista and said, well, you can bypass secure boot. If you can change the logic in the code, you can just tell it not to check the certificates and return true every time. And everything will boot fine in secure boot, even though it hasn't been signed or has a valid hash that passes the checks in secure boot. So that's what I believe Zeno was leaning towards. But I think it's kind of interesting because of the way secure boot works on these the microcontroller platforms like ESP32.
Well, what I thought was really interesting is, so over the last week and a half, I've been in a country that didn't have very good internet, and somehow this story hit me like 100 times. It felt like the press really, really pushed this one, that backdoor in ESP32. And I couldn't wait to dig into the details. And then just like you, Paul, I read this article. I was like, oh, interesting, right? Interesting take on this.
I would argue it's not just that it was a backdoor, but it was a backdoor in a Chinese product that caused the elevated interest, right?
An alleged backdoor in a Chinese company.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but Espressive, I thought, handled this well. Espressive did state that this is not exploitable remotely.
Nope.
Which I think is interesting. And despite the hidden features being very common features in many Bluetooth chipsets, right? Espressive was like, we're gonna take them out anyway. So I thought their response was great, regardless of the origin, where their country they're based in. I thought their response was great. And to Espressive's credit, they do make secure boot and firmware encryption available for platforms. If you're using that in a commercial setting, it's something you definitely want to enable, right? We've seen it, similar chips in heaters that we covered. And I've seen EV chargers use the ESP32.
Oh, yeah.
If you're in that, and I'm sure there's a million other applications. And what I hope is that, which doesn't always happen, right? That they've read the vendor specifications and gone, we have these security features available to us. We should use them because we're putting it in a commercial application. But I can say from experience that doesn't always happen. And it's very frustrating for those that work really hard in the design and engineering phase to go, like, some people worked really hard for the ESP32 platform to go, how are we going to implement secure boot and firmware encryption? Right? Like it's a pretty amazing process. And only to have most people not use it is frustrating. I've talked with people with Intel about that too. Like, they won't necessarily call out who they're frustrated with, but they do hint to a sense of frustration to go, like, at Intel, we created these great security measures, measured boot, verified boot. They were instrumental with Microsoft in creating secure boot. And now when people don't use them, that's really frustrating, or use them in the wrong way and misconfigure them.
Yeah, so this one was Zeno had some pretty interesting observations here too, that you talk about. You need to have some trust on the device, the software running on the device. They're undocumented debug commands that is allegedly in a trusted interface between the two layers of the Bluetooth device. So you've got to have physical access effectively to be able to make it happen, not over the air. But one of the things that Zeno noted was that Espressive, in kind of a novel approach, in a very forward-thinking approach, I guess, is that they make the software that runs on these chips available to the public on their GitHub page. Now, they're compiled binaries, but they make them available, and that's exactly how they found the undocumented debug commands.
Reverse engineer the binary.
Reverse engineered, but many of the other Bluetooth chip manufacturers and other chip manufacturers, they don't make any of that software available at all.
Right.
So, I mean, they were being somewhat transparent in that here's the software. Now, sure, there's a level of hacker you need to be able to do to discover these types of things, but here's the software.
Yeah, have you ever asked a developer to comment their code, and they're like, "Well, it's right there. It's the code. It's documented."
The code, my code is so good it comments itself. I've actually heard that before, though. I have.
Yeah, I think Sam says that all the time.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Oh, that was the official documentation for Bro when it came out. The documentation was grep the source code. And I was like, are you guys insane?
Confident in your code, right?
I
will say if you want to learn more about microcontrollers and exploitation, or if we're talking, you're like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, there's other resources, but Travis Goodspeed's book that I'm reading called Microcontroller Exploits, a huge recommendation for that. Fantastic. Starts right off talking about exactly what I was talking about earlier with the ROMs and the multiple bootloaders. So,
how easy is that to get through, Paul? I haven't read that book. What's it like?
It's very slow read. I have to read like a paragraph and then I have to read it again, and it's a very dense book. But Travis did an amazing job, just all around.
Yeah.
With that book, sometimes I have to take a timeout. I got to go on the internet or go to an LLM, have explain some background, and then come back to it. But that's what I love about the book is it's kind of pushing me to fill the gaps in my knowledge to understand it. So, let's get something a little less technical. The controversial pick for National Cyber Director, which is kind of followed on by the pick to lead CISA. As well, Jeff, you had some I thought was great takes on this. You read the stuff about it.
Well, so this will be the fourth National Cyber Director, and I know the first three, at least. Who
was one of the first ones?
Chris Inglis was the first one.
Mm-hmm. Who was before? Who was
when it was called something else, the Cyber Czar or whatever.
Yeah, who was that? It was Dick something. What was his name? He wrote a book. It was really good too. Now I can't think of it.
If only.
It was Dick Clark. Thank you, Sounil. Yeah. So this is kind of that was the previous position. This is the more
right. This is the National Cyber Director that was only established 4 or 5 years ago, and it started with Chris Inglis, and then it was. And then
Kemba in between as acting, and then Harry Cooper.
And then Harry. And then, the pick that they have today, I'd never heard of the guy. So I'm like, but they posted a bio and, he's an advisor to the previous Trump administration, business oriented, yada, 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 has zero experience in cybersecurity, which some people hypothesize, you don't need to know cybersecurity to run an organization that's focused on cybersecurity. I don't necessarily agree with that. I'll pick on Harry a little bit. I was hanging out with him a year ago. We were actually at a cigar event, and he had just gotten finally into the position. And so I asked him how it was going, and he said he made some sort of offhand comment about, well, it was going all right, but he didn't realize how political it was. I'm like, wow. I said to him, are you stupid? And my wife was with me, and she's like, oh my God, you can't say that. And Harry is like, no, he's right. I really was stupid. So the CISA, and then I saw the CISA announcement, and that person seems like perfectly legitimate and appropriately qualified to run CISA. He's just getting the organization ripped out from under him. So good luck.
That was they're both Sean something, right?
They're both named Sean.
Yeah.
So apparently, to be any kind of executive in government working with cybersecurity, you have to have a name named Sean. So leaves most of us out.
It's either that or big balls.
Oh
God. So going back, Jeff. So what is the role of the Office of the National Cyber Director? What do they do? Do we need someone that has cyber experience there? Does anybody know?
Bill's working for Elon. He's got these questions now.
Listen, I need 5 bullet points on what
That's right. Why we need a national cyber.
What'd you do this week?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, so I'll let Josh follow me because he works more closely with government organizations, but I believe the intention is to be an advisory position to the White House on matters of cybersecurity, especially to influence and introduce policy, which, we all like to hate government intervention and regulation and compliance, but then when something bad happens, we all point the fingers at the government needing to do something in terms of regulation. And
so in that position, you either need to know something about cybersecurity or have a very close-knit group of people who do know about cybersecurity to advise you.
And I'll say this, I had a conversation with Chris Inglis a couple of years ago, I think when he was still actively in the role. He gave sort of a little informal presentation to an alumni gathering of people that used to work for the Information Assurance Directorate. We're probably mostly familiar with the concept of people, processes, and technology being sort of the 3 major components of this thing that we do. But he called it people, doctrine, and technology. Which I thought was a very interesting and different take on it, which implies more policy and maybe more theory and maybe gets a little bit more more complex than most of us can understand. But Josh, fill in the cracks.
So here's the deal: CISA getting destroyed.
Well, Larry had a story about that. I don't know. Destroyed, but one of them was they had a $10 million contract with CIS that was not renewed.
Yep.
How about gutted, if not destroyed?
Gutted is a better word.
They laid off 150 people that were in their probationary period, and I think they just laid off 100 more
that weren't in their probationary period.
Correct. And many, according to one of the folks in one of the articles, was that it was at least 1 or 2 of the red teams at CISA.
Interesting.
Try most of the red team.
Yes.
So CISA is being gutted. Thank you, Jeff. That's a fantastic word. And so,
but I think, Josh, just to point out the red team aspect of it, on a previous show, we called that out as one of CISA's great accomplishments was the program that would offer vulnerability scanning, identification, and red teaming to critical infrastructure
even smaller businesses. Exactly.
Right? It's the 3-buddy problem, right? Ryan Narain kind of called out to his host, like, tell me what CISA's done. Like, why he kind of was playing the Doge role, like, give me the 5 bullet points. Like, what are they, right? And their host weighed in on it, and we weighed in on it, and that was one of the points. And now we see these budget cuts coming in, which is very concerning for me.
I'm not even going to talk about budget because that's outside the scope of my expertise. But I'm going to say that when you get rid of people that are in charge of handling or helping cybersecurity for critical infrastructure businesses that are too small to do it themselves, small, tiny municipal water utilities, small energy generation plants and companies. Yeah, there's a lot of big ones, but there's also a lot of small ones. And they don't have the people. Come on, remember the team.
You know what's funny? I was explaining this to my oldest son who was driving to school this morning, and it's super early when I have to drive him to school. But when I forget what we were talking about, and he was like, why do we have to pay for water? Like, shouldn't water just be free for everyone? And I'm like, well, here's a little known fact that Dad happens to know from his job is that when you get your power, electricity, water, sewage treatment, I'm like, it's not the government providing that for you. It's a private company. And they may get some government assistance, but it's a private company, and the private company has to pay for the people and the technology and all the buildings and all that stuff. And I'm like, that's why we get a water bill. That's what he wanted to do. He wanted to turn on the hose.
I thought you were going to go right to dysentery, but that would be where I was
that
going.
too. And I'm like, water's expensive because he wants to turn on the hose in March. I'm like, kind of on the cusp. And he's like, I don't understand why we had to pay for water.
There's a famous illustration of the incidence of cholera in London before and after they took the pump handle off a well.
Yes.
Cholera dropped like a stone when they took access to that well away, because that well was the source of cholera for that area of London. And so when you
because no one was maintaining it and no one was testing to verify whether the water was
right,
good.
Right.
Now we have both public and private utilities that do this for water, for sewage, for sewage treatment, which turns into water. Yes, it does. For all of the utilities, and a lot of these companies are tiny. They're municipal owned or they're municipal run or whatever, and they can't do cybersecurity themselves. So now we're gutting the agency that helps them.
That was helping them. Yeah.
CISA
had a huge program that was helping them.
Us.
Yep.
Because if you'll remember that TeamViewer exploit of that one water company where they were going to add sodium hydroxide to the water, that would, now, admittedly, there are plenty of systems that would have caught it, and I'm using this as an example, not as, oh my God, but it could have put nasty stuff in the water, and we gutted the agency that was helping. Not smart. Okay, one.
No,
Secondly,
I agree.
We put the technical guy in charge of the agency that's being gutted, put the non-technical guy in the very flamboyant, I am the new cyber director czar position. And what are they actually going to do without a lick of technical knowledge? And who do you think is going to go work for him to backstop him with that technical knowledge, considering that all they're doing is firing everybody out the door these days? So it's a titchy situation we've got right here. And I'll shut up because I'm not going to go any farther.
No, I agree. It's very concerning to me as well, Josh. I think there were good programs at CISA.
Yes, there were.
That were, and I mean, I can point to not so great, programs or programs at CISA that I have great frustrations with. This was not one of them.
No. Well, so what are they intending to do with those great programs? Are those going to continue to? So this is the first I've heard of this. Are they shuttering those? That's unfortunate.
Look, the Department of Education.
I'd actually like to see some government funding, even if it gets bid out to the private sector, to continue that mission, right? Right, because obviously the current administration is about shrinking the government. Okay, but let's play politics for a moment. Can we get some kind of subsidy to get these folks the help they need, even if it comes from the private sector? Look at me playing politics.
Let's talk about whiskey production and tariffs and our friends in the north.
Well, this is not cybersecurity, so let's not.
That is not cybersecurity.
but
what are you talking about? It's part of our show every week.
I mean, you're not wrong, Jeff, but you're not wrong. Now, the one that I think on this one, Paul, that subsidize it for private into private. I don't think it was necessarily about it was about the people. It was about the funding.
Yeah.
So now, if you're just taking it and putting it in private, like I'm sure you've shrunk the government, but you're still using budget, and I think it was a lot about.
No, I hear you. I hear you, but a common tactic in corporate America is, rather than have people be full-time employees, which costs a lot more, let's outsource it. Let's contract it, right? Because that's cheaper. Right. That was where.
I'm pretty sure the government started that before private sector, but I could be wrong.
No, I agree, Jeff. Yeah.
So this is a tragedy of the commons type of issue as well. And private industry is usually not really well suited. The incentives are not aligned well when it comes to a tragedy of commons type of scenario. So what is needed then is for government or some sort of governmental type of body to step in. I think the alternative is, as you mentioned, if the federal government is not going to fund it, then some state level government or some local government has to be able to fund it.
Yeah. Which might be the intention, that they're just trying to push it out. Sort of like the whole movement of small government, which used to be the theme of the Republican Party.
Well, and that's the MO of the Trump administration, is to push things to the states, right?
Yep. And what the other one too, you talk about budget, and maybe the budget would be cheaper for this, but what's the hourly rate of a pen tester for the government? And then if you were to go sub that out, what's the hourly rate for a pen test? Like,
in Rhode Island did a great job outsourcing his technology because there wasn't a huge. Anyway, so Darkstorm has taken down X. Several of you had this story Was this politically motivated? Was this just because we can? Do we get any insights into the motive?
This one was kind of funny for me because I haven't used X in so long. I didn't even notice it was down.
Same.
I didn't notice it was down.
I didn't either. Yeah. That's why I kind of hesitated when I posted my version of the story, because I'm like, did any of us notice this? Because nobody's on X anymore.
A tree falls on a forest. Did it make a sound?
Mm-hmm. But the article that I put up quoted that South African dude is blaming it on Ukraine. The attack's coming from the Ukraine. So they spun it political, not speaking for the motivations of the people that claim to actually have done it, which I'm sure was also political. But then political hacktivism at its finest.
Then again, we've said this for forever. Attribution is hard. Did it really come from the Ukraine?
Yeah, right.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that could just be a scapegoat. I think many highly publicized attack, like we see this all the time with nation states, right? Well, it wasn't us; it was the other nation state.
Did it come from Ukraine or through Ukraine, I guess is the better way to put it.
Right.
Well, right. And you have to imagine that, of any attack of any size that could impact something the size of X probably had several source IP addresses, right? Sure. So I imagine that you could pick and choose exactly which country it was coming from.
Well, we could also argue, much like we're not allowed to talk about whiskey exports because it's not related to cybersecurity, is taking X down even related to cybersecurity anymore?
Well, so I'm curious. So it was really interesting when this got brought up right now, is that there was kind of a consensus that none of us felt it because we're not using X anymore. That's really interesting to me. I wonder where you guys, what has replaced X for you guys? Like
nothing.
No,
I spread it out, right? So it's LinkedIn, it's
LinkedIn. You went
Threads.
to LinkedIn. That's nuts, man. That's nuts.
You gotta let me finish, Bill.
I'm on all
of them.
I'm gonna let you finish, but LinkedIn?
Yeah, that was your number one. That's where you went first.
It is. Well, I'd stand by that. I get a huge amount of traction on LinkedIn with, I believe, the right people.
Interesting. So, I mean, honestly, I made a big to-do on my X. Like, I'm done. I didn't delete my account. Right.
What is this, Bill? Bill, this isn't an airport. You don't announce your departure.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Wait, you have to announce your departure at an airport. I'm leaving. But so I tried to go blue sky, and what I found is I've just kind of nothing. Like I'm floating in the wind, I guess, right now.
Well, I use Mastodon, and I like it very much. It doesn't have much of the social network with jokes and stuff, but it has very good security news, which is what I care about.
And no algorithm, right? It's just a straight up feed, which is, I mean, it's a double-edged sword, right? So, if you do, like on other platforms, if you hit something that hits the algorithm right, it'll take off. But if it downgrades your stuff, then it goes nowhere. Mastodon is kind of just that like even keel. It kind of leaves it up to the people as to what gets popular, which I don't mind. I'm on Mastodon. I've always liked it. I like Blue Sky is interesting because Blue Sky is one of the few, aside from Mastodon, that doesn't penalize you for including a link. And that's a frustration with many of us. If I've done something on GitHub or wrote an article, like an awesome article where I'm giving away a lot of information for free, and I want to put a link to that in the Facebook and Twitters and Instagrams of the world. Instagram's the worst because it hates links with a passion. It will downgrade that in the algorithm, that post, because it has a link in it. Because they want to keep you on that platform, right? They don't want you leaving the platform. Oh, you put a link to some other site that takes people somewhere else. No, we want to keep people scrolling on our platform. Blue Sky doesn't do that, and a lot of creators have adopted Blue Sky because of that. But to your point, Bill, it takes a while to build up a following on a new social network, which is what I'm also struggling with.
And I'm going to call it Twitter because that's when I really used it. But I feel like out of all the social networks, Twitter was the most beneficial for me. Just the people that I followed. If I went on there, that was guaranteed on my the first like 10 posts that I saw from just the people I followed, I would see something interesting.
Yeah, I agree.
And
there was a time where it was awesome.
And I'm trying with Blue Sky, and it feels like I have to.
Because we're all scattered, dude. Because again, people have actually gone back to LinkedIn, and that's where people hang out. And people have gone to Mastodon, and people have gone to Blue Sky. Some people have gone to Threads. And so I just post on all of them, but I agree it's hard to have that one place.
Mm-hmm.
Reddit, interesting. Reddit. Yeah. I mean, well, it kind of ties into the next story when we talk about hardware and LoRa devices, right? There's this social media trend that I largely see on Instagram, where people just hold up like a cool hacking device, and they put it to music, and they're like, "Hey, look at me." And there's no information about what they've done. I'm like, that's cool, dude. But like, what did you use for hardware and what are you using it for? And then they don't answer people's comments.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
I bought one too.
I've seen it. Like, I've seen it.
What are you doing? Like you haven't told me. You just
I bought 4 of them.
I know. It's a circuit board plugged into my flipper.
Yeah, dude, it's some, and now there's ranges. Some of them are outright lies. Some of them I watch, I'm like, dude, that is totally fake. And I'm like, I'm not going to be the internet cybersecurity police. Although sometimes I'm really super tempted because I just see stuff out there that I'm like, you're doing a disservice to anyone, especially getting into this field that's looking at your videos. Like, wow, that's really cool. I want to learn how to do that. I'm like, no, dude. Thanks, Sounil. That was the best exit ever. It was awesome.
That was hilarious.
Paul Security Weekly is supported by Bitwarden, the trusted solution for password, passkey, and secrets management. Bitwarden empowers everyone to create and manage strong and unique credentials across all accounts and devices. With enterprise SSO integration, end-to-end encryption, and secure autofill capabilities, Bitwarden defends against phishing attacks and data breaches. Strengthen your security posture with tools built to protect what matters most. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Bitwarden.
There's entire YouTube channels on busting scams like that. Like my favorite one is the
we need to do some scam busting, dude.
But the tennis ball with the hole cut in it against the door, and the lock popped up, and then the scam buster went, it actually works. Puts the tennis ball there, poof, and the lock pops up, and then they roll back the camera, and you can see the person with the remote.
Yeah.
Well, the ones where you're like, oh, look, I can unlock this car. And I'm like, yeah, because you had the key fob in your pocket.
Yeah.
Like you just got a flipper going against a car that the flipper cannot unlock that car via RF. I'm sorry, it just can't. Anyway, it's frustrating. But there's some interesting use cases for LoRa. I think Larry and I both might have had a story about LoRa.
Yeah, and you know where my story came from?
Where?
LinkedIn, Bill.
Bill's not going to live that one down. We're not going to let him live that one down.
Hell yeah.
That's LinkedIn hat.
Yeah. Oh, man. Now I'm going to be a LinkedIn hat.
Let's see. Where
I can't find my LoRa.
I can't find mine either. Oh, my number's 3. Offensive security use cases over LoRa using 32 Esprit P32.
I can't find mine.
So, Paul, I think yours...
number 11.
Oh, yeah 11. Thank you. Yeah, how hackers can control anything remotely using LoRa modules. This is not quite what I wanted it to be. This is really cool in that you could... There's a specific LoRa setup that you can do that uses a Bluetooth nugget, which is a specific circuit board that they've added a LoRa radio to. And I want to say over the LoRa communications, they can execute a command to trigger the hardware to do something to trigger a sensor, right?
Yep.
I was like, that's cool. I'm like, that's not quite what I was looking for. I'm like, that's cool. Awesome stuff.
It's like
but
effectively at that point doing a long range serial link.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to have hacking devices that are doing stuff over RF, and then my back channel is LoRa. So I can manage and monitor the devices independent of their monitoring or hacking, if you will, capability. And I want to say I've seen, again, I probably saw Instagram videos where someone did that and didn't explain it. And I was like, I think that's possible, but I really got to dig into it more.
Yep.
And I thought that's what it was. And I thought
Man, can you imagine if the C2 channel was LoRa, how hard that would be to find?
But I think that's Larry's story, right?
Is that pretty much? So the story that I had from LinkedIn, Bill.
Larry, didn't you actually find that on LinkedIn?
Well, so the best part about this is I've clicked your link. So Larry, I did click your number 3, and I'm already signed into LinkedIn. I can't wait to just read.
Another convert.
Yeah. So they effectively took 2 LilyGo modules and turned them into serial consoles. You send some commands, it goes over the lower network, it comes out on the other side, so that you can start doing commands.
C2 use cases for LoRa-based C2 communications.
Yep. So some use cases for C2: data drops, anonymous C2 communication, low-powered covert operations. Making detection by RF monitoring tools more difficult compared to Wi-Fi or Bluetooth.
Right.
Stealthy network access in restricted environments. Yep. Remote access channel. But
I have a silly but somewhat serious question. How long is long range in this context?
Depends on how many nodes you have in your mesh, right?
And it depends on line of sight,
we're talking
too.
feet, miles, or hemispheres.
In LoRa, it can be miles for sure.
Okay.
Well,
go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I mean, so I think when you say miles, you're talking best case scenario, right?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So it's not like ham radio.
It's a mesh, but it's a mesh, right? You have to have enough. Repeaters, right?
It can be a mesh, but
it can be a mesh. Is the right way. Yeah.
So if you guys keep talking, I will tell you exactly.
So I had something in this. So I have a lot of side projects. One of them, I continued from last week. Continued my Raspberry Pi with the M.2 hat. I got my M.2 working. Turns out I just had to. I don't know if I had to reseat the cable or flip it around, but once I got my ribbon, there's a little ribbon cable that goes from the Raspberry Pi board into your M.2 hat. Once I got that plugged in right, my M.2 was working. I installed Kali on it. And I have to say, first off, it's very performant. Like I've run Kali on Raspberry Pis and I'm like, I can't.
Yeah, it's garbage.
That's terrible.
That's garbage.
This, I'm like, holy crap, I can actually use that. So I installed Kismet. And then I was like, oh, cool. I've got a Wi-Fi dongle. I've got a Bluetooth dongle. Right. And if you're curious what I'm using, Larry and I have the links. We were talking earlier this week about that. We'll tell you what devices we like for that Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. And then I was like, cool. But I'm like, I know Kismet supports other devices. I'm like, I have a couple of SDRs. In fact, of course, I had to go buy a new one. Right. And you can configure your SDR in Kismet. You can configure multiple. And in the Kismet configuration, tell it to tune into a certain frequency. So now I've got one SDR on 433 megahertz, and I've got another one on 915. The 915 should pick up on LoRa communications here in the U.S. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yep. It might not be able to decode them.
But it could tell me if there were communications in that frequency, is my guess. And I haven't gotten it. Like I have it. It recognized the source device, and it said it's in the interface, but I haven't received any packets on it yet. So that's where I'm at with that project. So to Larry and Bill's point earlier, right? Like with the C2 communications, how would I detect that? Kismet is one of your options.
Last time, so I was in at Black Hat, Singapore, I think is where I was at. There was a buddy of mine that had some of the off the shelf like mesh tastic devices that are just super cool looking or whatever.
Oh yeah, and I got 2 in bags right there that I still have to put together and put cases.
And we were in the very, very top of a very tall building, and he put one outside, and kind of just as we were kind of walking around Singapore, and I remember that he had very strong signal 2-3 miles, like it truly was because line of sight and all of those things. But
they also make mesh tastic repeaters. So that to make it more of a mesh, and at ShmooCon, we had the spam brought and sold mesh tastic pager styles.
That's right. Yeah.
I bought one. Larry and I both bought one. Yep. Actually, and those are awesome too. I love it.
Yeah, that's a bunch of bullshit. He didn't even try and sell me one, and I hung out with him all night. Like
he sold out.
No, because it's a long story, Bill. I'll explain later.
Right.
But
there's a reason for that.
Is he he set up some channels, some chat channels. And so on your phone, even when you couldn't get cell signal in the deep recesses of the Washington Hilton, you could still get the mesh tastic channels and chat that way. Does anybody know what's going on here? And somebody would answer you.
Yeah.
God, it's so dope,
I was on those channels. That was really good.
That's so
great
sick.
place for testing my. I was like, I can finally test out my LoRa stuff.
We need that nationwide like back channel hacker shit. Like that's so sick.
If you call
build
him.
Official distances 2 to 3 kilometers, coverage outdoor with obstructed views, and 5 to 7 kilometers in unobstructed
That's
with line of
sight. Sick. So Paul was right. Take it, Paul. Take it. You were right.
Miles.
Yeah.
And I will say that
best case scenario, Miles.
In the 2 to 3 kilometers coverage outdoor obstructed, one of the tests that I remember seeing early on when LoRa was just starting to poke its head above out of the dirt type of thing. One of the folks effectively took a pair of LoRa modules, made it so it would do a little ping back and forth, and he put one in the basement of his house, below grade, below earth, in a cement basement, and then put one in his car, and then drove around and see how far he could get in a metropolitan area. Like he lived in the city, so there's all sorts of buildings and all. You guys are
making me so excited. I just want to stop the show and get those bags at the end of the table. One is a Heltec V2, and one is a T-beam, LilyGo T-beam. And it has all the antennas in the 3D printed cases. I just have to put it all together and put the firmware on.
Larry, have you started gardening by any chance? Have you started gardening? There was at Larry. Have you started gardening at home?
No. I mean, like weather-wise.
I mean, it's still a little too.
I'm just saying there was a lot of earth and budding out
below grade.
Grade. There was a lot of. I mean,
the weather did turn nice here this week, so we're thinking about gardens, and I haven't gardened this season.
I see. Yeah, it's
emerging. It's a tad early still.
A little early. Sam, I want to talk about your story number 8. This was my favorite story that you posted by far. I love this so much.
Yeah. Well, it's pretty interesting. This student decided to tackle the coding exam that comes from Amazon, and he created AI
and
programmed an AI to do it.
Many large tech companies, as my oldest son starts applying to jobs, right? He's encountering this when 16-year-old applying to jobs. Some require like all this training and all this other stuff, and some don't. And I'm like, it's similar to big tech, where some they just require Amazon, eight interviews, and you have to write a paper. And I won't call out the company that I would never apply to, because I've heard people talking about it on the internet, but I've also talked to one of my good friends that went through it as well. And in both cases, I was like, I would never apply to work for that company. That's atrocious. That's atrocious.
Yeah. I've had students going through all that. Yep. But anyway, this guy programmed an LLM to do the interview, and he passed. But then somebody told the college, and they're going to expel him. And he said, well, I don't care about your college, and I don't care about this company, because the fact that an LLM could do it means a job isn't worth having.
I love it. I would hire this person on the spot.
I know.
Person, I mean, if you want to apply, if I create a company and you apply, you're hired on the spot.
Yeah, I mean, they've shown a really useful skill that is more important than whatever they thought those coding tests were testing for.
He is so much better than every other candidate right now in my mind. Every company should be banging down this kid's door to hire this person.
But the problem is that he says that he doesn't want a tech job anymore, because he feels in 2 years he's not going to have anything valuable to contribute.
Come to cybersecurity. You've got the hacker mindset, dude. Sure. You will have a job in this industry.
Because he feels that AI is going to take away all of those jobs.
Maybe.
No, he can make the AIs. Yeah. I've been telling students this for years. You want to be the guy that sells the shovels. You don't want to be the guys digging for gold.
Yeah.
And so be the guy that programs the AIs, and then you've got a real job.
And he did. And this person did, which I think is great.
Yeah. Yep. Which is the main skill. I mean,
but
the point
I love
is,
how he hacked
especially
the system. He's like, I could answer all these questions, or I could write code an LLM to answer all these questions. Like, dude, that should be the number one candidate. We have this all wrong. That should be
now, I think I have a student who tried this. I had one of my homework projects that asked them 5 questions. They were supposed to read an article, and they were all spectacularly wrong. And I said, did you get an AI to write this? Because it misunderstood every question. But anyway.
Yeah, well, I still give him a A for effort.
Oh, yeah. Well, this one.
Right? The mindset of I need to solve it. So where I see the AI in the context, let's just say of cybersecurity, maybe in IT and technology in general, is how are you using AI in your job? today.
Yeah.
Like if you're not using it to advance, to do things faster, better, more performant, more efficient,
Absolutely.
then you're going to get, if you're not using it,
I balk at better, faster, more efficient, maybe, but I'm holding out on the better.
Yeah, but
you could make good reasons not to use it.
Yeah, and every technology solution doesn't have to be
and
perfect.
You're a curmudgeon.
Right.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and I swore I'd never use it. Yeah. Period. So no, I don't use AI in my day-to-day.
Better at certain tasks
if I can help it,
and more efficiently. Can we say more efficiently?
Jeff, I'd love to do a test where one of us or someone trains an AI model.
Paul Bunyan
on the PCI specifications,
right?
And then we have Jeff Mann. It's almost like the chess match, right?
It's Paul Bunyan.
It's Kasparov versus the IBM computer in chess.
That would be pretty easy to do.
Who could answer the questions better about PCI? Is it an LLM that's been trained on the PCI?
Sam?
Well, it's funny you should mention that. But
you don't even have to train it. You just use reg. And how big is the PCI specification? How many pages? It can't be bigger than a whole novel.
But there's multiple. It'd be interesting to at least take the current version and the previous version so it knows the differences, right?
Mm-hmm.
This would be a very easy thing to do with an LLM.
I do think
I will take that challenge, and we should do it on air sometime, preferably from a bar.
Yeah,
but to that point, Paul, we have a Slack channel. We have Slack at our company where I work, and I am allowed to be on the Slack channel for our pen testing team, our technical services team. What do they call themselves? Offensive something or other. And a couple weeks ago, there was a question came up about a pen test finding, and somebody was asking, is this really a finding that needs to be remediated because it's not a PCI customer? And it was kind of a PCI related finding. I forget what it was off the top of my head, but I don't think it matters. But the guy that runs the practice posted this thing about, well, here's some information on PCI because, PCI 4.0 and whatnot. And I'm reading through it and I'm like, this is wrong. Where did you get this from? And he's like, oh, I had AI generated. I'm like,
Well, and so I was also
but that's a blanket statement because if I were to ask an LLM about PCI, I would create a custom
would be
content.
Wrong.
But I would create to improve my chances, I would create a custom context. I would take the PDF of the PCI standard and I would have that as a resource for it, right? Like
that's what you do.
You got to spend a little extra time in tune it, right? Sam.
Well, I mean, I actually went back and said, and I actually annotated all the things that were wrong with it. I didn't just make a blanket statement.
Sure. Yeah,
I said, this statement is wrong. And really, since it was I think he said it was ChatGPT, which was probably fed the old version.
Correct.
Because the answers didn't apply to 4.0. They were more accurate in a version 3.2.1 context.
I'd be curious to ask the same question if you created a GPT. And
I want to take this challenge.
Let's do it.
Attach the PDF of the PCI 4.0 standard.
This is not
the
a challenge that is properly instrumented. What is the challenge? To have an LLM that can answer questions about PCI?
That's how I'm touting.
What is the challenge?
That's how. It's interesting, John. I see where you're going with this question. Can an LLM get to the analytics brain of Jeff, right? I think it's going to fall short. Look, I'm the one proposing this, and I think it's going to fall short. I think Jeff's human brain and experience will outpace any LLM.
I think
how close could we get it? I think is the real
question,
answer,
and I don't think Jeff would argue that.
Yeah.
Well, I think the real answer to this is that an expert using an LLM will result in a faster solution, right? So,
efficiency.
It's just like programming, Paul. Like it's just like that.
Yep, I agree.
You run it and you get this Python code back that's 80% right. You just fix it, done.
You can fix it. Yeah.
Same with anything, right? The problem is you just can't put a problem in and expect perfection out.
We can't put Jeff's brain inside of the LLM.
Well, we
could take what Jeff writes and put it in an LLM along with the PCI standard, and that would probably get us much closer.
And what I think is interesting about this particular, so if we're talking about an audit or anything like that, also I want my assessor to understand the mitigating circumstances that just
I completely agree, Bill.
Different,
that's what I'm saying. I would want
that,
Jeff as my PCI assessor over an LLM
for sure
today, any day.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
But I think we could get pretty close and have a good resource.
Well, I mean, it depends. If I was a schmuck and had a horrible actual environment, I'd want the LLM because I'm sure I
agree. You trig it, right? You try and trig it. Yeah.
You're calling all of my clients schmucks. Oh, wait. Did I say that out loud?
Well, you didn't. We did.
No, Paul's not.
Well, at this point in my career, I get a lot of my primary customer persona is I get all the oddball one-offs. It's not as straightforward answers, but somebody has to make sense of it all. Typically,
sure.
So
I'm faculty.
They're not schmucks.
In the interest of time, let's change gears. Spatial-Domain Wireless Jamming with Reconfigurable Intelligent Surfaces.
Sounds like that was written by an LLM.
Well, it was actually an academic paper, which I agree.
Same thing.
Exactly like it was written by an LLM. But ironically enough, I used an LLM to help explain this paper to me. Now, it could hallucinate all day long, but we have the paper and the researchers as the actual source.
But what's the common denominator, not to beat the dead horse, between an academic paper and an LLM? Both of them lack the real world experience.
No, I think it's a valid observation. It's so this paper is really about Wi-Fi jamming in a way that allows an attacker to be more precise in the target, in this case specifically over Wi-Fi. So radio interference to disrupt legitimate wireless communications, whereas traditional jamming methods lacked the precision. This paper aims to increase the precision through what they call reconfigurable intelligent surfaces, engineered surfaces that can digitally control the reflection of radio waves. They're composed of small but tunable reflectors that can adjust the phase of reflected signals. They're emerging as a tool to enhance wireless communications by optimizing signal propagation. And it went on to say, basically the steps are eavesdropping, listen to the signals, identify the target, use the optimization algorithm that is the reconfigurable intelligent surfaces to strengthen the signal towards the actual target, and then jamming with that RIS configuration, as they call it, reconfigurable intelligent surfaces. In theory, it made sense to me. Again, AI could have hallucinated some of this, but I don't know, Sam.
So it does make sense. Sam, go ahead though.
No, I think headlights in Europe already have this. High beams dodge the other cars, and I think it's essentially the same technology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I mean, absolutely, this is something that absolutely makes sense, and in fact, it's used by some wireless access points currently.
I can see that
to be able to do
to get better signal to the client, right? Yeah.
And I'm drawing a blank on what it's called at the moment, and
I'm sure there's some fancy marketing.
It's direction channels in Wi-Fi 6, I think.
Directional.
It's been available prior to Wi-Fi 6 as well, and beamforming.
Yeah.
Beamforming, and in fact, we just do some discussion about beamforming. If you want to sniff Wi-Fi and they've got beamforming, now you've got to be right in the path of between the access point and the client.
Wow.
Unless there's more than 4 clients connected to the access point, because then when you get there, you don't have enough radio capacity to be able to use beamforming anymore.
Interesting.
So it's never been a problem.
Is that where Ubiquiti had more of the, what do they call it, spatial something?
Probably.
To create more of those channels, essentially, for lack of a better term.
You're effectively generating multiple sets of waves. It's noise cancellation. In an omnidirectional antenna. That's effectively what it is. So they're doing similar types of things. They're doing noise canceling to be able to direct their jamming attacks to specific targets. It's effectively what it is.
Sam, I want to hear from you about the biggest crypto heist in history and how it went down. Because I saw this article, I heard some people talking about it, but what do we call it? Funny money?
Yeah, it's pretty simple.
It's like monopoly money, right?
It's pretty simple. I mean, it's just like all these cryptocurrency heists, all the cryptocurrency distributors are just a bunch of tech bros like Elon Musk's Doge that don't understand how careful you have to be with money. And so they just use sleazy, poorly thought out software. And what these guys did was they had a Ledger hardware wallet to hold their stuff cold storage, which is a good thing to do, and there's nothing wrong with the Ledger wallet.
Hardware wallets and cold storage implies there's no network connectivity, correct?
Right, that's it. So a hardware wallet just keeps your key for the wallet offline, so nobody can steal it with any malware or anything, and that works fine. But then you have to plug it in and use it when you actually want to transfer money out of the cold wallet.
I think the three-buddy problem was talking about this, right? Like, you take the USB thumb drive, you sign something with the key, and then it puts it on a USB thumb drive, and you take it to another computer, right?
Yeah. But the problem is they also use a cloud service, and they used a free cloudware service called Safe that doesn't have the enterprise class features you need, when there are pay services that are much better. And they continued to use it even when they were putting $1.5 billion in that thumb drive.
Wow.
So the result is, since it didn't integrate properly with the hardware wallet, you would get a transaction request and you're unable to verify the amount of the transaction before approving it. Wow. And this guy was in the habit of just approving them because they look good, and didn't notice that the one he approved was $1.5 billion.
And he approved it without the process of going to the hardware wallet.
I mean, I've worked at an escrow agency, and no money ever left without a second person looking at this money and making sure it's going the right. This is something banks have known for centuries.
So
the amount should also govern more scrutiny, right? Yeah, or
of course you should have everybody has a limit. You can only process things up to this limit, and anything bigger has to go to somebody who is more careful.
You have to talk to someone on the phone. I mean, that's standard in banking, right? Like, you can transfer up to this amount. Over that amount, you got to show up in person, show your ID or whatever the case.
Yeah. Now Safe did put out a report, and that's my article number 4, is that Safe did put out a report from Mandiant saying how it was done, and it wasn't really that exciting. They infected a Mac laptop with malware, and then they stole an AWS session token, and they were then able to get in their AWS repository and inject some extra code, which made the appearance look wrong. So, it's a supply chain attack and a social engineering attack, but it's also a failure of just basic banking security controls.
Right.
Yeah. So, investing in crypto is crazy, man. This is the problem with it. These guys are just sloppy. I remember there's one of the number 3 cryptocurrency came out maybe 10 years ago, and I looked at it the day before it was going to launch. I went to their website. I said, well, I'll download it and try running it. And the download links didn't work. All it had was the front page of the documentation, and the other pages weren't there. And I said, this is an empty box. And it became the number 3 cryptocurrency for a while. It's just people throwing money at things they don't even understand without the slightest attempt to be responsible. It's pretty horrible.
I want to transition to the pen test that, in my mind, should not have been a pen test. It's my story.
Oh, I wanted to talk about that one
Jeff,
too.
This would trigger Jeff for sure.
Absolutely.
And good call on getting some stories from Sam, because I know Sam's got to go in a moment.
Yes. Thank you. I made a list before the show. I think it's helping. So my story number 15. And I don't want to knock the pen test firm, and I don't want to knock the company, right? Because we're all in this together. Right?
I do. But go ahead.
We all need to up our game. I'm not bashing people. Really doesn't. I don't think helps. But let's talk about this in a healthy manner. Because there was mistakes, I think, on both sides that we can all learn from, right? That's when a company's ready for a pen test, and as a company, when you believe you're ready for a pen test. I think those things were out of whack. When I read the details about the physical pen test that was conducted, they described situations that we've talked about on this show for better part of 20 years, that there were workstations that were left unlocked. There were public computers with USB ports enabled. But the kicker for me, too, was that there weren't protections against the regular rubber ducky attack. Like a USB hid rubber ducky attack, there are well-documented methods to protecting against that. That's why the newer attacks that emulate different drivers, what are those called? There's the rubber ducky. What's the other device that Hack5 makes?
The Shark Jack?
No, it's not the
that's
Lance
the
terminal.
Bash Bunny.
Bash Bunny, thank you, Bill. Yeah, Bash Bunny, right, emulates like a network driver, but so it gets around some of those limitations. I mean, this is stuff we've talked about. I mean, this is 10, 15-year-old research that we're trying to combat against, and this company could have been advised beforehand, because these are well-documented attacks, such as, a Active Directory group policy about locking workstations. That's many, even me with an hour's worth of research, I could write a recommendation to be like, this is the group policy. you need to implement it. And I'm not a Windows person at all to lock your workstations automatically, right? The same thing with public USB ports, vulnerable to rubber ducky attacks, missing network controls. That's where the LAN turtle came into play, right? They recommended network access controls or NAC. I think Bill's having the same reaction I am, right? Like firewall controls, your inbound and outbound could also prevent some of that stuff too.
Pop quiz, Paul, and don't look at the article. What was the company that they attacked?
They said it was it retail?
It was a retail furniture store.
Store. Yeah.
All
and
right.
PCI would likely cover all of these, Jeff. Right, most of them.
Well, I'm uncomfortable that
when you're
picture.
When you're ready for me,
covers an overloaded term, right?
When you're ready for me to provide my input,
but the last one was in what I kind of deemed as poor physical security and training. Right? They were like, oh, we were able to go into a manager's office and just access the computer with what I read as kind of light social engineering. Right?
Yeah.
Like
well, they said there was no social engineering, and you know what? I think
no social engineering was allowed.
No, I agree.
Because you know what they did? Whenever they would walk by somebody, they'd say,
they said hello.
Hey,
they said hello. Yeah, to me that's social engineering.
Yep.
I mean, we could get lots of argument on that, right?
Sure.
It all depends on what your definition of is.
But I think the missing security control in that case was user awareness and training to be more resilient against those attacks and to implement a process and procedures that would prevent attackers from easily accessing physically areas of the building. So my assessment, right, after reading this article was this target organization wasn't ready for a pen test. All of us on the show and most of us listening, right, you could write a report or recommendations that you should implement before you have this kind of penetration test that would have made it a much more productive exercise in my opinion.
It also has the feel of a much smaller organization, not huge enterprise type of thing.
Trying to make a splash, trying to get their name out there, and
I think
we're giving them airtime. So
the pen test firm and the target are, I think, both, Larry, to your statement, are in that category of not high in the security maturity curve, but also much smaller organizations. Yeah. Which is good that we're talking about, because if you're listening and you advise smaller clients or you are a smaller company, like you shouldn't do a pen test like this, and you should ask people for recommendations like this, because this is stuff.
I want to hear Jeff's rant. I want to hear
Jeff.
Yeah.
So, what piqued my interest is because the title of the article was in store. So I was like, it's retail, which it is. Now, as a somewhat of a disclaimer or a caveat, the pen test company is French, it seems. Yes. And so I'm guessing the customer was probably French, and very, very broad stroke, Europe has been ahead in payment security by decades over the U.S. ever since the beginning. They do chip and pin instead of, we eventually started doing chip and signature, but that's not the main thrust. But if this was a critical infrastructure company, a water utility, an electric company, I think that these findings and your comment on them would be much more applicable. But given that this is a retailer, and in theory, all they have to answer to in terms of security, in terms of regulatory compliance, is PCI, and having worked with retailers for the past 20 years, where I've never done a physical pen test, but I've had to go on site and do inspections of their retail locations. And very often, at least in the old days, the manager's office was also the back office, was also the data center, machine closet, whatever you want to call it. And very often, if it was a store that had multiple checkout lanes, they would all talk to a controller, a server that 100%. Would aggregate all the transactions.
First software company I worked for, I can
and send it on.
Jeff. Yep.
Yeah. So So the manager's office would be a lucrative target. Also very common in retail environments is a cash office, which is where they bring the tills from all the cash registers and collect all the money, and that's where the safe is, and that's where, in the old days, if they had the knuckle busters, card readers, they'd keep it in there. Yep. Any paper manual transactions was in there.
And more confirmation on this. If you think about.
As if anybody's not believing me. But go ahead, Larry.
Segvec, Soup Nazi, what was his name there? The guy that got nailed for Hannaford's 7-Eleven TJX Corporation.
That was Gonzalez, wasn't it?
Yeah, Alberto Gonzalez. That was his modus operandi. He started compromising registers and realized he wasn't going to get enough data, so he pivoted to the back
controller,
to the back end server.
Transactions from all the cash.
That was in the manager's office, and then he realized he could pivot from there to corporate.
Scary. I wrote code that ran on those controllers.
I mean, I had a client several years ago. It was convenience store gas station where the controller for each location was just underneath the counter at the convenience store. And I'm like, no, PCI says any system that's storing card data, which it did, has to be, data center behind physical doors,
right?
Camera on the door, access control, and all so on and so forth.
Those are the front doors to the convenience store. It's behind the door.
Open 24 hours. A lot of them not even a lock on the door.
Back in the day, those weren't rack mounted. Those were like tower PCs. I remember.
Oh yeah, they were little PCs just sitting underneath the desk in a cabinet that might have a door.
IBM 4690 was the cash register operating system, but also the controller. And I wrote code for the controller. And it was literally like a small tower PC.
But this one particular client, I said, could you at least get one of those cables, like you lock down a laptop and put that on the thing? So, we called it a snatch and grab. Somebody comes in and just walks away with the server. And we did a site visit. I'll dig up the photo sometime. I have a picture of the guy that was walking me around all the different stores because the cable was there, and he shows me both ends of it because it wasn't actually connected, but it was wrapped around the server and just not locked. Anyway, the manager's store these days. The manager's office these days, not necessarily a lucrative target, but just in general, the fact that they were doing this pen test, a physical pen test of a retail environment, I'm like, that's not a PCI thing. PCI in no way, shape, or form specifies or calls for any kind of a physical pen test. Not that it's necessarily a bad idea, but in most retail environments these days, I was just trying to picture the scenario. The 4 bullet points, the USB port is active. For a long time, I saw that when I would do different jobs where there was other regulatory compliance, and I don't know which one says lock the USB port down, or I had clients that were filling up the unused USB ports with epoxy. And I'm like, but what about the port that you've got the card reader plugged into, or the keyboard, or the mouse? What about that one?
USB headers if they get into it or whatever.
And you're lucky if it was actually a USB port and not a serial port, which is how it's been for most of the 20 years that I've been doing PCI.
They did recommend the PCs be in a locked box, not that an attacker couldn't get by some kind of locked cabinet with a really inexpensive lock on it. Like most of us could pick that just by breathing on it,
layered security. But like the one finding was talking about unattended workstations being unlocked. I'm like, well, that's every cash register at every checkout stand in every retail, plus kiosks. There was no mention of whether they were publicly available kiosks where you're just basically tapping into an online e-commerce type application or an application where they're keeping track of their inventory. Now, they did say that they were able to do one of those things and get an internal tunnel set up to their domain. But I kept looking for in the article, but to what end? It's a furniture store. What are you trying to protect against? What's most valuable at a furniture store? the price of the couch for one client versus another, or the payment card information. They had apparently no knowledge of PCI or any of the PCI requirements.
I agree,
which was
Jeff.
my
I
biggest
think,
beef.
Yeah, I think the threat model there is more about the payment card information.
Well, they said lock the workstation after 5 minutes. The PCI requirement is 15 minutes.
Sure.
Well, it's 15 minutes to disable a session, remote, assuming it's a remote session, login, but it is usually satisfied by the screensaver being invoked after 15 minutes on a workstation or a laptop.
Yeah. I thought it was an interesting article. In the interest of time, I do want to move on, but I think that was an interesting.
I got to do my PCI rant. I'm happy.
Awesome. My story number 22. So. This one was super interesting in that
By the way, ChatGPT would not have had any of that comment for this article.
And I backed you up on that, Jeff. I backed you up on that. My story number 22 was interesting because the article had been taken down. So I use a bookmark saving service that stores the contents of the article. So if I flag an article in my bookmarking service, it saves a copy of it. When I went back to this article after I had saved it several days ago, the article was not, I got a 404. Now, sometimes that happens for various reasons. Maybe they changed the URL since the time I bookmarked it is usually the case. But I went back and I Google searched for the title of this article and I saw references to it. And all of those references were also 404. And the original article describes a technique for bypassing CrowdStrike by putting the EDR CrowdStrike process in a sleep mode. So rather than kill it or evade it in the 50, 100 ways you can evade EDR, they were like, you don't need to kill it, you just need to sleep it. If you sleep it, there are limitations to that. You can't do certain things, but you can do certain other things that allow you to evade the EDR. And that's just not CrowdStrike, that's a bunch of other vendors. The interesting, I thought there was a conspiracy. I'm like, maybe they got a takedown notice from CrowdStrike, which could still very well be the case. However, it's weird because they actually coordinated this disclosure with CrowdStrike, who CrowdStrike, after not wanting to fix it, actually fixed it. So the statement reads in 2025, CrowdStrike does not allow process suspension anymore. It appears to have decided that process suspension is indeed a detection gap that should not exist. SEC Consult, who was the firm that found the bug, was not informed about the status update. They found out because they tried to use it on a subsequent pen test and it didn't work. And they're like, oh, look at that. CrowdStrike actually fixed this particular bypass. So I think the whole thing it's super shady to me.
Super shady. It is available.
It needs to be transparent, right? Like everyone should have been transparent. I think CrowdStrike should have worked more quickly to identify this as a vulnerability or bypass and fix it. We would have seen this article sooner. But the fact that the article disappeared from their site is super weird.
It's available in full.
Nothing to see here.
In full with images and everything on the Wayback Machine. So
there you go.
Of course
yeah. Right. Yeah. So thank you, Bill. Anyone can get
it. Wait, so you mean anything that goes out on the internet is there forever?
That's what they say. That's what they say. So, Paul, I want to talk about your number 16, the Rayhunter, the IMSI catcher.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know what's funny is one of my coworkers was like, dude, you need to buy one of these Orbic Verizon branded IMSI catchers. He's like, because you can put firmware on it, and the firmware will actually detect if someone has an IMSI catcher and is intercepting you. And I'm like, dude, that's awesome. So Larry and I were just talking about this before the show.
Yep.
And I traced it back because I have two of them that I bought off eBay.
What?
For like $11 for like $11 each.
Yep.
And I put it in my I have these plastic container storage devices that I bought at Harbor Freight. Multiple different models that I store my electronics in, right? So I keep buying new electronics,
you keep buying
more organizers, and store them. And I bought a label maker, and I'm going to start labeling them. And so I got two of these.
You can keep your guns in those too. Just you can
put guns. Oh yeah, the Apache 2800 is an awesome one I made a humidor out of. But so I have two of these IMSI catchers or IMSI catcher detection devices that you can enable with this firmware. IMSI catchers, right? With this firmware, and Larry bought yours on Amazon.
Yep.
I bought mine on there's a ton on eBay. Go buy them now.
Yeah.
Because I think as this EFF project called Rayhunter takes off, which is the firmware that you can flash on these devices to detect the IMSI catching, is going to take off, the stock is going to start shrinking, right? So Larry has 2, I have 2.
Yep. So
we need to report back on a future segment and put the firmware on it.
You found out about a month ago. There was a big push media-wise about a week and a half ago. And that's when I found it, was the push a week and a half ago. The push week and a half ago, there was a link in the article from the EFF to say, hey, go to Amazon and buy these here. And I got it early enough in that spin cycle that I could go to Amazon and
get them for $11 a piece, which is about what we're going for on eBay.
Right.
Yeah, although now, my guess is there'll be more.
Well, so I'm on eBay right now, and you can find them for $11. I'm buying 2 right now.
Yep.
There you go.
Yep. So I was following along the last couple of days in the RF Hackers Sanctuary Discord, and people were getting them for $13, and you couldn't get them from Amazon from that link anymore. And apparently, these devices are also been known to have very spicy battery pillows.
Oh, interesting. So get 2. Yeah.
So,
get 2.
So just be careful with your batteries in these things. And
if you wanted 2, get 4.
Yeah. Also,
don't leave them on the charger for too long. Maybe.
Also following along that, a couple of folks are having issues getting them flashed. Something to do with the SIM card that's in them, and another one. It looks like it finishes. The installer fails and doesn't tell me anything, but I guess it installed and it shows the green line, and it does work. So
I hate that when you're like, should I reboot it? But if I power it off and power it on, is it going to brick it?
We kind of jumped into this pretty quick. Tell what the project is. What's Rayhunter? Like, what is that Rayhunter? What's that project?
Yeah. So the quote I pulled is that Rayhunter analyzes the traffic in real time and looks for suspicious events, and this is on your cellular communications. So it includes the unusual requests is what it looks for. So like the base station trying to downgrade your connection to 2G, which is vulnerable.
Right.
It'll pick up on that. Or the base station is requesting your IMSI under suspicious circumstances, which isn't qualified. It'll notify the user when something suspicious happened, makes it easy to access the logs for further review and take appropriate action. You can also download logs in PCAP format and analyze it or send it to an expert for analysis.
Sick.
Yeah, I love that. It notifies the user when something suspicious happens and makes it easy to access, allowing users to take appropriate action to protect themselves. And we had this discussion. It's in one of our clips. Like,
too late.
What are you going to do? And the answer is, such as turning off their phone and advising people in the area to do the same.
I was going to say,
turn off your phone.
I mean, 100%. Most people aren't going to be doing this. It's only people in the know like us that are going to do it. And what are you going to do?
Well, so I do have a client that, when I saw this, this is something that they need to use.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And Jeff, I will say that, people in the know, I think the intent here was to be able to release this for free and very inexpensive hardware and provide automation for installs so that someone without a lot of technical expertise could do
I would use this in concert with OpenSignal, which is an app on your phone. OpenSignal tells you cell towers that are in your area and has basically and 50 people saw this cell tower over the past year.
Neat.
Which says to me that cell tower has been there for a while.
Yeah, that's cool.
So it tells you about available cell towers in your area.
Well, I just can't wait to
like Tinder for cell towers.
But I mean, you could do something like this with a Signal Hound. But this is really nice to have a quick. The one thing I need to figure out is what SIM card, do you need a full-on SIM card with an active unlimited plan or something?
So.
No.
Well, I just can't wait to test it in Vegas like everybody else.
Yeah. Right?
Oh,
God. This will be the new flipper at DEF CON next year.
It'll be the LoRa radio clipped to one side of your backpack. It'll be the IMSI catcher, the Rayhunter,
the Batman, sling bag, basically.
The Chewbacca. It'll be the Chewbacca sling.
The Chewbacca sling bag.
Even better. You know what's going to happen? Somebody's going to do one of these, and it's going to send the when it goes off and does the alert over LoRa to mesh task.
Yes.
Yes.
Everyone turn off your
phones. While you're doing all that, I'll be at Frankie's. Just to let you know.
I want to get nostalgic for a moment, and I think you folks will appreciate this, and many of our listeners will as well.
Because I might have a little nostalgic one in there that's sort of off script, but
sure.
Yeah.
My story number 17 comes from Zero Science Lab, and I miss vulnerability disclosures like this. I'm not sure I could do a vulnerability disclosure like this for my day job, and it would pass through the powers that be in my day job, because I wish it would. Like, they would probably be like, they would probably be like, Paul, this is awesome, but we could never publish it. But Zero Science Lab published it, dude.
That's the funky flaw, baby. Straight up Tampa Town.
So it's a vulnerability in a building management system that runs PHP. And I don't know if you guys remember, I can't even remember the names of the groups back in the day.
Yeah, like Acid and
like SSH vulnerabilities. What was the one that was finding vulnerabilities in OpenBSD and Tazo? And it reminds me of like Anonymous and some of the other groups that were, or all those groups that were disclosing vulnerabilities way back when, would disclose them like this. So the vulnerability description actually reads, it starts off with, yo, check it. The ABB BMS BAS system got a slick little weakness in them. The caldavinstall.php and other PHP files. All you got to do is drop the skip checksum beat in the post vibe, and bam, the system skips all that MD5 checksum nonsense.
Oh, shit.
And you can read the rest.
Yeah, no expert mode needed to crank the funk.
And the vulnerability was called Funkalicious. It's called the Funkalicious exploit. Like, I feel like we've lost some of our flair. Like, we need to bring it back. Like, this vulnerability.
Do I need 32 pieces of flair?
It has flair, dude.
17.
There's so much flair.
We're talking get the quote right, Josh.
We're talking tampered tunes, hitting the deck, opening the door to messing with the system, or dropping some nasty uploads.
Dude, if
all
you go,
unauthorized, like
go read the exploit, the Python file that they posted to exploit this vulnerability. It is so old school. I'm like, oh my God, you just took me back like 20 years to when
to 1995 when hackers came out.
Yeah.
That isn't 20 years.
This is,
speaking of which, I watched the net last night.
30 years. Fuck.
30 years. I watched the net last night because it's on Netflix now. And I haven't seen it since it came out back in 1995.
Is it worth the watch today, Jeff? Weigh in on this.
It's worth the watch today.
No.
Because it really, I didn't. If you had asked me what the plot was, I couldn't have told you. All I remembered from 30 years ago when I watched it was there's some scene where she's like popping open a laptop on the hood of her car, and she gets instantaneous internet access, and I'm like, no, that's not real. That's not a thing.
Back then, you had to work for internet access.
I mean, back in those days, every system on the internet was connected by a physical wire. Which also is a physical wire.
Which is a physical wire. Well, I mean, at some point it doesn't need a wire, but anyway.
Well, yeah, but
this Python code is hilarious.
But
oh my God, dude, the Python.
Some of the functions.
We can spend the rest of the show talking about the Python code.
But to answer your question, it's worth the net is worth a watch because it really. I don't want to give away the no spoilers.
I don't want to give away the plot of a 30-year-old movie. Well,
the Sandra Bullock character, she gets her identity.
30 years, damn it!
She gets her identity erased. It's not identity. It's not identity theft. It's like she disappears and she has to prove it's her.
When did the net come out? What year?
1995, same year as Hackers.
It was the same year as Hackers.
It was the same year as Hackers.
No spoilers to a 30-year-old movie, Paul. Darth Vader is Luke's father. Come on now.
Oh, you spoiled it, bro. People haven't watched Star Wars yet.
That's more like 40 years old, but whatever.
Well, Joko, if Joko, the author, if you happen to be in Vegas, come say hi, man. I'd like to meet you. It's pretty dope.
Oh, we'll buy you drinks.
Dude. Embodying the hacker spirit from the days of yesteryear.
Yeah, and more importantly, if you do come say hi, please share the the large language model that you use to funkify.
Right.
Oh, it's funkified. It's got the funk. Oh my god,
It's got the funk.
Is there a KRAD LLM out there? Remember when that was a thing?
Well, ask and you shall receive, Jeff. Like now, that's all you need.
Mm-hmm.
Now wait, if I told you you needed a flipper zero to do JTAG, what would you say?
Needed?
Larry
and I.
Would that be my tool of choice?
No.
It wouldn't be most of our tool of choice.
If that's all I had,
I would believe
if that's
you.
all I had, I
Yeah.
would use it, right? The tie guard might be tops on my list, and talking to my coworkers about about this. The article mentions, actually they call it out, which is why I love this article, because when you read this article, you're like, you did a great job of explaining how I can use a flipper zero to do JTAG, and you can't take that away from them. You're like, oh, I want to poo-poo it, but I really can't, because you did a great job.
Exactly.
And they talked about other devices, and because they're like, oh, you could use a Sega J-Link, great choice, FGDI based interface, open OCD compatible programmers, and the list goes on. TieGuard is one. I don't know. I'd recommend the Bus Pirate. Is kind of it doesn't do JTAG.
Yeah, it does.
It doesn't do it very well.
It
does it. It wouldn't be my first choice.
Bus Pirate 3 has done JTAG really well for a long time. I don't know about the 4 and 5.
The 4 and 5 is kind of wonky. The 3 does.
The 3 has done JTAG forever. SWD is the one that the Bus Pirate 3 is crap on.
Yeah, I bought the Raspberry Pi SWD Raspberry Pi debugger.
Yes.
Awesome.
So
highly
I think
recommended.
the JTAG stuff, I don't know if I've ever used a JTAG device twice. I always just buy it again, and I probably have 4,000 of them. If I open up like my sock drawer, oh, there's a JTAG. Like
there's a JTAG something or other. But you can
use a JTAG in every drawer.
And look, they go through the setup and explain it very well, and they repaired their Proxmox 3. And look, props to them for admitting, like, we didn't read the documentation very well in the Proxmox 3 when it said, like, don't disconnect the power when you're doing this kind of thing. And they did. And, like, shit, I just bricked a Proxmox 3. I need to recover it over JTAG, and they used the flipper zero to do it. So,
who reads the documentation at all?
Well, who unplugs the power when you're updating the firmware?
What did they said they did something bad. They did something really bad. Where is it?
The kid tripped over the cable.
Yeah, I know. We've all been there.
Proxmox 3 used various pens. So we started an update procedure, and a lot of red warnings showed up while the firmware was being flashed. I told my friend who immediately pressed Control-C on the keyboard.
Yeah, as you might have guessed, you should never do that.
And then the documentation says, upgrading the boot ROM of your Proxmox can brick the device. Please exercise caution when upgrading the bootloader. And the comment is, some info in Proxmox docs, which we didn't read. You know what? Props for admitting you made a mistake. And then describing in detail how you fixed it. That's what the internet should do.
When most people are updating firmware, do they sit around I wonder what buttons I could push that might screw things up? What can I do?
Dude, fuck away.
Yeah. I'm sacrificing whatever animal they said in the documentation I should sacrifice to make sure my firmware
I quit breathing. I quit breathing.
Yeah.
You hold still. Don't touch. Don't go near.
Yep. Sit still. Don't even get up to go in the other room.
That's right.
No, you might jiggle the electron.
That's right.
Who remembers when you had to run a utility to unseat the drive if you wanted to move your desktop PC?
Not here.
Did you?
Not here.
All right.
No.
Hey, we're over, but I want to do one last nostalgia that isn't on our list.
Yeah, let's do it.
And it's super quick. NASA turns off 2 more elements in their Voyager probes so that they can conserve battery life to have the missions extend for significantly more.
Battery
Wow.
life.
What year was Voyager
battery?
launched?
Right? I mean, it's using decay of an element to generate power.
Nuclear generators.
Yeah, but the point being that the half-life has reduced, so they're not getting nearly as much power. So they need to start shutting down, or it wouldn't make it to the end of the year. They want to conserve it for as many years, and arguably one of the things that they were shutting down is essentially useless.
So that's nostalgic, but for the millennials and Gen Z that listen to this, what's Voyager and when was it launched?
Voyager is a series of 2 spacecrafts launched in 1977.
I was going to say, I think it was the year I was born, actually. It was
with golden records. They have passed the heliopause. They are actually out in interstellar space.
Wasn't the record like the White Album or something? What was the record?
No, it's the golden record with sounds and pictures and a stellar diagram.
But there were songs. What songs?
There were some songs. There was also like sounds of birds and
nature,
whales.
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 That was the movie. That was a
but it was only supposed to. How many years are we past its normal operating life? We're like 30 years, something like that.
Yeah.
Easily.
Like,
think about the engineers that worked on that project.
Legit.
And how awesome they are.
Awesome.
They're dead, Paul.
Well,
yeah, right.
Yep.
They're still awesome.
How awesome they were.
They were awesome.
They're still fucking awesome, amazing people who built some beautiful machinery.
I just want to call my story.
Because they didn't use any LLMs.
Right. My story number 10. I had multiple stories. I had a story about not using an LLM.
I saw
it. Was a coding challenge from SensePost, right? Like your challenge is to learn a new programming language, write something in it without using an LLM. And then I think you earn your stripes to use an LLM to help you in the future. Also, my story number 10 was this wonky story about how they were bypassing EDR. Did you, right? Like they're on a Windows box and EDR is blocking the ransomware, but somehow they found this Linux camera and were able to compromise the Linux camera, and magically over SMB that allowed them to conduct ransomware. I'm like, but if the EDR is picking up on your ransomware, how are you? And I'm not the only one to ask this question. If you read the comments on the articles about this, everyone's asking this question. I'm like, maybe you're just, if you're like that smarter and more elite than I am, props to you. And you just need to explain it to me, and that's cool. But like on the surface, I'm calling bullshit.
Yeah, I agree. So I read through it, and I've responded to Akira a couple times. They are great. Okay. They're a great group. This article doesn't make any sense, but just from reading in between the lines, it sounds like they needed a distribution point on the inside of the network. They tried using a Windows server. EDR was eating their lunch. They needed to find somewhere else to do distro. They found a camera that was able to set up an SMB share to get them to their other targets.
There is a good possibility this is legit. We just don't have the details.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's worded on. It's just all. Yes. But using a camera to bypass EDR doesn't make any sense. Right.
Like, it sounds like a trust relationship.
It's sounding like the EDR was on the systems where they were trying to basically drop their dropper to pivot to everywhere else. Right. And they found that the camera could do the same functionality SMB server that didn't have EDR, so they could drop it there and then distribute it within the network.
I agree.
So server had EDR, camera did not.
But if the malware came from the camera and landed on the Windows system,
the EDR phone came from inside the house.
But the data, maybe they set up an awesome data service. Like if I take the data from the Windows server, I send it to the Linux camera, it encrypts it, and then it sends it back to the Windows server and deletes the original.
Bill agrees with me. It's a trust issue. It's not whether EDR was running.
So Akira also really targets ESX servers and Linux servers. So the Windows server that they were trying to distribute had EDR in their launch. They got it on a camera. Got it, and then used SMB to get it over to the ESX or whatever, right?
So no EDR on ESX that would eat their lunch, or not on desktops. Okay, got it.
But we still want more details.
Yeah,
because what we're saying is still speculative.
Yeah, prove it. We don't believe you. SRM.
I
agree. show your work.
Yeah,
show your work. Yes, this is a case of show your work.
Yeah,
have an LLM generate your work so we can see it.
Just because you may understand how to prompt the LLM to do it doesn't mean you know how to do it yourself.
Hey, listen, my story number 19 is a web vulnerability scanning with LLM agents. So I'm curious to see how this...
web pen testers...
And yet we have to wrap.
And we have to wrap on that. Larry, take us out.
Over and...
Yes.
Bye, Larry.
Yeah. Bye, Larry. Larry has left the building.